March 22nd, 2021. My name is Sam Cedar. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. Emma Vigeland is here with me, as always. How are you, Emma?
I am doing well. Happy Monday.
So, we set up this clip, and I just happened to see the clip this morning. And so it obviously resonated with me because I knew that we were having Chase on this afternoon. And
it resonated with me because it was a work thing, basically. I wouldn't give a shit about any of this at all if I wasn't compelled to through my work. Like, the funniest thing about this is, for those who don't know, the Majority Report is this lefty, kind of centrist, lefty, very parliamentary focused show. Like, I don't know why I'm explaining it like nobody knows. They're much bigger than I am. Anyway, they used to have a presenter, Michael Brooks, who unfortunately died some time ago. And there was always this weird dynamic on the Majority Report when he was alive, because there was also a presenter called Jamie Peck, and she seemed like quite a bit younger than obviously Sam, but also potentially Michael. And she was very much like a ContraPoints leftist, like a Tumblr communist. So she would often be pushing this kind of like total revolution now kind of shit, which she was never able to do it very well, I didn't think. But added to which, like, Sam just had this seething hatred for her, it seemed, that you could sense anytime she spoke. She would get cut off all the time. Anytime, so many times when she would make a joke, everyone would just like leave it. And there was this weird tension there the whole time.
All right, folks, so we've actually got some pretty crazy video here for you. Now, I've actually been saying this for quite a while now because it's an observation that I had made quite a while ago, quite a long time ago, okay? And that was that anytime Jamie, who's at the Majority Report, is speaking, the looks on the faces of Sam Cedar and Michael Brooks are always of this incredible indifference, or just sort of like, oh, like, I can't wait till this is over, or any of this kind of stuff. And I've been saying that for a long time just because it's something that I noticed. It's definitely odd, to say the least.
Yeah, one of the hilarious things is I have previously made a video entitled Sex Blind Trans Inclusion or something to that effect, and it was in response to an interview that Michael Brooks did with ContraPoints. Yeah, Michael Brooks is so fawning and so like, oh, you're hilarious and insightful and so important, to essentially someone who is like a religious huckster preying on vulnerable people, like someone who says they can talk to the dead or whatever. And then Jamie will just say anything, and Michael will be like, ugh, you're not gonna advance my career anywhere, shut up.
But here, what we have video of is Sam Cedar just absolutely losing it, okay? Absolutely losing it in a response to something that was said by Jamie, which is extremely disproportionate response, as well as he seems to have misinterpreted what Jamie was even saying in the first place. But to give a little bit of a preface to this, they're discussing the video of Nancy Pelosi where she explains that basically in 2006, when she had first become speaker, she was aware that Bush lied America into, the war in Iraq, right? But she just said, nah, I didn't impeach him for that. And everyone's like, yo, what the heck? That's like the number one thing to impeach a president for. So people are like, what the hell? And so that's what's going on. And with that said, I'm going to let this go ahead and play.
you're going to, I mean, I don't think you should. I don't think you should be doing that in the first.
Actually, before I let that go, I do want to say that it's not very often that Sam Cedar gets very angry. Now, he used to get angry more often. I don't know if he just reserves it for special occasions, but he curses in this, which is extremely, extremely rare. He used to curse a lot more often, but now he rarely ever curses. But this is one of those situations.
First place. But the idea that she's going out bragging about it on CNN, and I still didn't impeach him. Are you kidding me?
Iraqi
That's
lives are not a
insane.
factor for these people. I mean,
It's
let's be real.
insane.
And this is why so many people are turned off by the impeachment narrative the way it's going right now, because it is dominated by people like her.
What? That we should, because she didn't impeach George Bush, that you shouldn't impeach now?
No, I'm
why is it that you need to shoehorn that in there? It was wrong then. It's wrong now. You hold them to account. Every time you do not hold a president. The reason why he was able to get away with that was for the same reason why Ronald Reagan, because we didn't impeach Ronald Reagan. You hold them to account. If it's not enough, that's the problem. If there's other people who want to go out there and march to impeach him for other things, they should do it. But hundreds of thousands of people died for that. I'm not going to hear this fucking bullshit anymore.
Can I finish
I'm
what I was
tired of it.
saying?
Yeah, finish it.
Because I agree with you. I'm saying you look at Nancy Pelosi and she says, oh, yeah, we wouldn't impeach Bush because his lies led to the deaths of millions of people. But when someone breaks the emoluments clause, like that
he's not being impeached for emoluments. She agreed to impeachment because people pushed for it. Period. End of story. She didn't want to impeach.
I know. I'm just saying she gives it a bad image.
She gives impeachment a bad image?
Yeah. Because she wouldn't impeach Bush over stuff that
well,
led
then
to the
anybody
deaths
who
of
thinks that
millions
impeachment
of
is a
people.
problem because Nancy Pelosi was reluctant to do it, I think that is really faulty reasoning.
I don't think so, but I'm just saying.
Well, bring in the people who want to have that argument, because I'll have that argument with those people. But if you want to represent them, then I'll have it with you.
Jesus, I was agreeing with you.
Well, I'm sorry. I just like the idea of shoehorning this in. We're talking about Iraq. I got fucking calls from military personnel whose lives were destroyed during that time. It's just, I shoehorning this shit in to the skepticism of I don't know who, the 8% of Democrats or the Republicans about impeachment into this story is just, it's ridiculous.
The story is also about impeachment, but
I understand.
clearly I angered you and I did not mean to.
I'm sorry. I'm a little sensitive about this.
Yeah, so am I. My only point is that she's being a ghoul.
She's been a ghoul. That's right. It's just unbelievable to me that she has the gall to go up and brag about this stuff. The value of impeachment is worth it just to get her to come up and admit on television that they knew. I don't know if that admission has happened in other places. I haven't heard of it.
So, and then I believe that is the end of, if I'm not mistaken, I believe that's the end of his sort of blow up there, but there is no doubt whatsoever, and we'll get to the portion where he actually does his apology for that. There's no rationale for him, blowing up like that. Clearly, first of all, what Jamie was saying wasn't even really controversial. I mean, does Nancy Pelosi put a bad image on impeachment? Of course. She took so long to impeach Donald Trump. They haven't put emoluments as one of the charges, obviously. And then you have that recent, her just talking about how she didn't impeach Bush for the, lying us into Iraq, right? So she's literally agreeing with you and you lose your mind or you really go off. There's no like defending that. There's no rationale for that. And then especially when you start getting into like, oh, it's like, he's sort of the boss there and Jamie's an employee. And it's kind of awkward when you've kind of got that upper hand. You're just kind of like going off on your co-host. It's like, it's a bit much. Now, he probably just, lost his mind for a second, which is fine. It happens to everybody. And he does end up apologizing later on. But that was definitely not a good sign. In addition to that, like I said earlier, there has been a just continuous, of dismissal of Jamie's takes from the beginning on the show. They always seem to have this look of dismissal or indifference or this I don't care type of thing. They always seem to have that kind of look anytime she's even speaking at all, right? So that wasn't good, okay? And it clearly looked like he was just trying to, go off on something. It seems like he's kind of going off on like Kyle Kalinske types, funny enough. The people that he's going after, it seems like, the Kyle Kalinske types when it comes to the issue of impeachment is what it seems like he's really angry at, if anything. But he kind of took it out on Jamie. I mean, what Jamie was saying was, totally, honestly, I would deem that common sense. Of course she gives it a horrible image. It's Nancy Pelosi, and she took so long to get it started in the beginning. For so long, she didn't do anything, and then there's that recent video, of course. But I will also show you guys the apology of Sam Seder.
I wasn't around for the fight like you were, but
Look, Jamie, I'm sorry. I should not have gotten that heated about it. But I should have handled that better.
Pete Michael's face there, by the way. I want you to pay attention to Michael's face here.
Just the idea of that the problem with impeachment is that we haven't done other things.
No. I think you misconstrued my point, and I appreciate your apology. All I was saying was that Nancy Pelosi is a politically bad representative of impeachment for the reasons that we went over. And I could see how it would be bad strategically to have someone like that who is such a ghoul on so many topics and who didn't think we should impeach over the Iraq war, being the public facing representative of impeachment now.
I don't think she is. I think to the extent that there's any public facing, it's where's Adam? I mean, that's what the Republicans are. It's Adam Schiff and it's Nadler to a certain extent as well. Impeachment. Nancy Pelosi is so far away from impeachment. She's bragging about not doing it during Bush, and she was. It's well known that she was reluctant to do it, and. So, I mean, I just think that, like, in the context of I get it that impeachment is not fun for certain people or that people aren't psyched about it, but that's okay. Fine.
So, that's his apology there. Again, well, I'm going to repeat. When he's talking about this group of people that he's speaking about that he disagrees with, it very much sounds like he's speaking about the Kyle Kalinske types, right? The folks like Kyle Kalinske who are like, too much legal jargon and all this other stuff, and it's just too deep and it's not really palatable to the American people, etc., etc., and so therefore it's not catching steam. That's who it sounds like he's going off on. I don't really know why he went off on Jamie, because he, as you just saw there, he says that he agrees with what Jamie is saying. And again, I would find it pretty questionable if you disagreed with what she was saying. She is a bad representative for impeachment. Nancy Pelosi does suck. Like, Nancy Pelosi is not good. And especially on this issue, right? So the idea of him getting pissed off at this, I'm not really sure what happened. Maybe it was just something else that went down. Definitely not a good look. And his apology did have a but in it, and some people are saying, there should be no buts in the apology. It should just be like this full throttle apology, basically. I think that he messed up here, but obviously, it's not like the craziest of deals. He definitely should, just avoid doing that in the future. Definitely seemed kind of weird. A lot of the comments down here, just to read a couple of these. This one says, I agree that others never back up Jamie, and the general tone towards her is dismissive too often. It's pretty much always that way, to be quite honest with you. Michael needs to teach Sam some of his meditation techniques. Jamie is cool. Uncle Sam didn't take his cranky pills. Jamie and I may have a disagreement. Sam always takes everything Jamie says in the most uncharitable way possible, something he does far more to people on the left. That, and he also straight up cuts her off and talks over her constantly. Maybe if he would ever let her get more than a 3-second soundbite in, she can explain her point more. Damn, Sam, I think your blow up on Jamie was very unwarranted. I know that you extensively covered Iraq at a shameful time in our country, but she attempted to make clear multiple times that her point was not what you assumed was. And so there's just a bunch of comments of people talking about this. I mean, there's no real defense of what he did. He was wrong to blow up on Jamie like that. And they, generally speaking, have an incredibly dismissive tone and just reaction and cadence anytime Jamie's saying literally anything. So those are very clear, obviously. Sam clearly seems to have this sort of built up anger at what, like I said earlier, is the Kyle Kalinske types of not being in favor of impeachment. And so he kind of just took it out on her, which is, not cool, obviously. But, everyone makes mistakes. So I'm sure, hopefully he will not do that again. But let me know your thoughts on this down below. Very curious to hear them.
But the thing that makes it relevant to today's story is that, like, gender identity and, like, thinking Chase Strangio is a real human being, they're all out of that ContraPoints Tumblr communists playbook. And Jamie, like, left the show, I think about 6 months ago or so. I feel like it has this kind of exorcism type thing to it where Sam thought, like, potentially by Jamie leaving, it's like, oh, finally we don't have to talk about these, like, furry uprisings and shit. We can talk about sensible policy. And then now he's the one interviewing. Like, we should do an interview with Chase Strangio.
It has been completely, maybe, I was just wondering, maybe I'm missing things. That maybe in some way it is like, it's, that trans folk are having, like...
Trans folk. The humble, hill-dwelling trans folk. Trans folk from... that didn't exist up until about, like, 7 years ago. Their rich heritage.
Something turned at one point where trans people were enjoying all of these sort of special privileges.
Yeah, so that's where I wanted to intervene.
Just even when I'm saying that as a way that I'm being a little bit over the top here.
They're like the Capitol people in the Hunger Games. They have everything, and the rest of us, we've got nothing.
Maybe I'm confused. Maybe trans people are enjoying all these special privileges. It's like, okay, you're unaware, apparently. So, the thing is, Sam, what is so tragic about this is that there are so many people who are on the left who you could interview about this topic to actually get a better understanding of what people's criticisms of this ideology are. And I think you know that, which is why instead you're making a joke about, like, oh, wouldn't it be ridiculous if I even considered this subject? I just get, like, vibes of religious people being like, well, Bobby thinks he's bigger than God. Let's see what happens to Bobby.
Just even when I'm saying that as a way that I'm being a little bit over the top here. Trans people were enjoying all of these sort of special privileges.
There's a few kind of concepts that I think are important to this discussion, and one of the concepts that I think we'll have some agreement on is the idea of colorblindness and the understanding that most liberals have, progressives, etc., that there are instances in which colorblindness can be good and instances in which it's bad. And there are ways in which a lot of liberals will recognize that conservatives have limitations when conservatives constantly claim that they're colorblind and sort of put forward as a virtue that they're always colorblind. And the liberal sort of counter to that is, well, that can actually, if you're not considering race at all, that can actually mean that you end up doing things that are quite racist and not even noticing because you haven't considered race at all. So we, I guess, I would imagine, have more or less agreement on that. In the same sense, if we're talking about race blindness, the same can be said of sex blindness, because there is particular oppression that people face on the basis of their sex, which is what, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, like, on the basis of sex, that was her big victory. Now, you could also argue that people are oppressed based on their gender expression, but regardless of whether or not that's the case, there is definitely oppression on the basis of sex. And so what gender ideology demands is complete sex blindness, in the same way that conservatives will demand complete race blindness. So we're socially compelled as a society to completely ignore a very material reality in the oppression of like 50% of the population. And this is perfectly summed up by the fucking idiotic phrase trans folk, because it groups together all these people who have starkly different interests and origins and material realities. And like, a lot of people will say, like, that's why there are lesbian groups and gay groups, and there are gay and lesbian groups, but there are groups for specifically gay people and for specifically lesbians, or gay men and lesbians. And the reason is because even if they do have some shared commonality, there are also material differences in like where they're coming from. And so if there are material differences in the position of a male homosexual and a female homosexual, how are there not material differences in the position of like a 13-year-old homosexual autistic girl that has her breasts amputated and is put on Lupron, and like a 43-year-old man who's lived his entire life as a man and now suddenly wants to transition because it will allow him to compete in female sports and take his current mediocre sports performance onto the Olympic stage? Like, those folk, that's not a real community. That's something that's being imposed on these groups in order to cover up the material differences in what's going on. And so if you want to know what like people are really afraid about with gender ideology, people are afraid about the over-medicalization of children. One of the groups that are constantly dismissed or pilloried by the rest of the LGBT community are detransitioners. And you would think if it was all about expression and your personal journey and even the most marginalized of the most marginalized, you would think people would love detransition stories. But the problem with detransition stories is they completely undercut most of the ideological basis that so many doctors and like the medical industrial complex and NGOs, they're all getting their money basically on the idea that trans ideology is legitimate.
It's me, Ben, or GNC Centric, and today I'm going to do a video about how I, a lesbian, believed for many years that I was a gay trans man.
This time next year, I will be living my life as a man.
You said that was such great conviction. You've made your mind up.
Oh, absolutely.
Do you like being a woman at all?
No.
Wouldn't that be just the worst feeling in the world?
I've hated it since I started developing. I hate it now. I cannot look at myself in the mirror and love the person that's there. I can't do it. I've tried my entire life since I started developing.
So because I had dysphoria, the fact that I hated my female body was like unquestioned and acceptable. So hating my female body, being in denial of being female, being in denial of like having a female sexuality, and just like hating my body was totally acceptable and nobody questioned it. So it made me fine with hating being female and thinking that I was a male. Everybody around me said that was fine, that was normal.
Great conviction.
So I thought that like after being on testosterone long enough and after getting a mastectomy that I would eventually like pass and I would be good enough for a gay man. Like literally I had like, I can't believe looking back, I had such a small, like such horrible self-esteem, like such a horrible view of myself.
I cannot look at myself in the mirror and love the person that's there.
I just wanted to be like good enough to be a bottom, and I thought I would have sex like always facing away and like never facing my partner, and I would like only ever have anal because that's like what I thought a gay guy would want, and that like I didn't know what orgasm the females could orgasm, so I was like I'll never orgasm and like I won't have a penis, but as long as he's happy I'll be happy. Like that was what I was like looking for. That was like when I grow up that's what I'll have and I'll be happy.
And my dad! Oh my god, hi!
When I grow up that's what I'll have and I'll be happy. So if you haven't caught on, all of this is like based on internalized lesbophobia. I will explain. So I hated my female body, I hated all female bodies. Anything to do with like female experience of sexuality was like out of my mind and like irrelevant to me. The concept of like lesbians was like always out of my mind. It was something I couldn't even think about. It was something that was like irrelevant to me, which I recognize now is just denial.
Oh, absolutely.
So nobody challenged these feelings for me. In the queer community, it was like, oh, well, that just means you're trans. But nobody challenged that, like, this could just be, like, you hate being female because you can't accept that you're a female homosexual on some level. I don't know. Like, nobody challenged or me. And nobody, they talk all the time in the trans community about, like, being your true self and stuff. But, like, nobody gives you the tools for self-exploration. They just give you labels and they give you, like...
She's transgender!
Rhetoric, and they give you like experiences that you should find similar, and there you go. Like they don't give you tools for anything to do with exploring the self or like self-actualization other than to like copy someone else basically. So the concept of like being with a man is inevitable is like it's part of compulsory heterosexuality. I'm gonna put a link to Adrienne Rich's essay Compulsory Heterosexuality for you guys. So yeah, I despite like feeling that I was supposed to be with a man, I changed it from a straight man to a gay man because then that took out the like heterosexual possibility of babies. Like not literally, of course, if it was possible I could have gotten pregnant or something if I had actually like done that, but like in my mind I was like with two gay men, the whole thing of like being a mother is like not even there, so I don't have to worry about that, which again is like another way that I was in denial of my femalehood. I think that this was just like my mind finding ways like very slowly over time to cope and make a situation where I was with a man sexually a survivable situation. So I think that what I just described is not unique because I'm gonna put a link to a Twitter thread or two in the bio here, in the description. Because I know like at least 6 lesbians who are detransitioned or re-identified who used to believe or live or act that like they were gay trans men because they believed they were. And then like after detransitioning or re-identifying or they realized they were homosexual females, or they realized they were homosexual females and that's why they detransitioned. That was kind of what happened with me. And I think that there is a significant number of trans-identified females right now who are in relationships with men, who are on Grindr, who are having sex with men, who their entire relationship is based on dissociation. Their entire sexuality is based on dissociation. It's extremely unhealthy, and I worry a lot about them. Like, I know some people are going to find this offensive, but I think there's a lot of trans-identified females who are actually lesbians who have so much internalized lesbophobia that they've gone from, like, I'm a female who's attracted to females, even if it's, like, in the back of their mind something that they can't acknowledge, to the very opposite end as far as they could go to I'm a male who likes males. As far as you can get from lesbians is gay men, right? As far as you can get from ever interacting with another female body is being a gay man, right? And also, like, gay men, there's, like, a bit of a, like, we hate female bodies, vaginas are gross, that kind of thing. Like, when you hang out with gay men and you already hate your female body, they're, like, reinforcing your dysphoria, and you feel like, oh, this is right. They feel the same way as I do. So I think there's probably a lot of lesbians who are in that situation right now who, were they in a different environment, they wouldn't be acting that way, or experiencing those feelings, I'm guessing. So the one thing that helped me so much was I went to Michigan Family Reunion in 2017, and there was just so many butch lesbians everywhere. They weren't, like, trying to be masculine, or they weren't, like, trying to be trans men. They were just naturally butch, and, like, they weren't, like, putting thought into it, or, like, it wasn't an act or a costume. And I realized, like, that's just like me. I'm just naturally like that. And then seeing all of these, like, lesbians of, like, different ages, seeing that they're, like, happy and they're okay and everything is fine. And also, in that festival, there was no males allowed, so a lot of the females would walk around without their shirts on. And just seeing these lesbians who were so comfortable with their bodies, it had a big impact on me. Yeah. So it helped me a lot. Like, the number one thing I would recommend for somebody who is, like, struggling to realize if they're a lesbian or not is to, like, hang out with some lesbians. Yeah. So that's the end of my video. If you have thoughts or questions, put them in the comments. I'm also always on Twitter if you want to strike up a conversation about this. Again, I know that this video will probably offend some people, but I'm just relaying, like, my experiences, my thoughts, my opinions. Trying not to take it too personally.
They're all getting their money, basically, on the idea that trans ideology is legitimate. I mean, the Majority Report is an example of this. It's an organization that, you know, is a for-profit thing, altruistic as its goals may be, but it is now financially invested in gender ideology, which is what makes this like, oh, am I missing something? Like, dickhead, you aren't even allowed to ask the question. Like, if you even started to think like you might be changing your mind on this position, you would lose your channel and everything you worked for so fucking quickly. Yeah, and you fucking know it, and that's why you're saying this Jamie Peck shit, because you know you have to. So, when you ask the question, what can trans people do that regular people can't do? That question is going to have dramatically different answers depending on whether you're talking about a male-bodied trans person or a female-bodied trans person. Because in the same way, you can imagine if a black person just self-identified as white, even if there were certain like forms and official documents that recognize this whiteness, the material reality of their blackness would prevent that recategorization from allowing them to now fully live as any cis-racially white person. On the other hand, if a white person is allowed to identify as a black person, they get to keep all the benefit of their family and all the rest of it that they get from being a white person. And they get to access all the scarce resources that are available to specifically help black people. So when you're talking about the special abilities that trans folk get, a lot of times it's not trans folk that people are worried about collectively. It's specifically men. And when there is no criteria to being trans other than self-declaration, this means that the problem isn't people who self-identify as trans. It's the ability for anyone to self-identify as trans, which people are obviously going to use opportunistically because people are opportunistic. So one of the major problems that people are talking about is having violent sex offenders housed in female prisons. And again, if you want to actually do the journalism that you think it would be so funny if you actually were to try.
Just even when I'm saying that.
A great person to speak to about this is Heather Mason. She's a former prisoner and specifically female prisoner rights activist. And I'm sure she would love to explain to you the reality of the situation faced by some of the most marginalized women in society. But I'm also sure you'd lose all your funding if you ever did, so what are we gonna do? Now, being able to serve your sentence for sometimes repeated, sexual murders in a women's prison sounds like a privilege that a lot of people serving time in men's prisons would certainly recognize as a privilege. Likewise, being a mediocre, middle-aged male athlete who can then compete in the Olympics because he's competing on the women's team also seems like a bit of a privilege. Now, obviously, none of these privileges can be acquired in the opposite direction. So a trans man isn't going to get any advantage from competing on a male team. A trans man isn't going to get any advantage by serving their time in a men's prison. But thankfully, we don't ever have to think about these distinctions because we sum these two completely disparate groups up in the heartwarming trans folk.
I'm not going to hear this fucking bullshit anymore.
Can I finish what I was saying? Jesus, I was agreeing with you.
Well, I'm sorry. The idea of shoehorning this in, we're talking about Iraq. I'm a little sensitive about this.
Yeah, so am I.
He's sort of the boss there, and Jamie's an employee, and it's kind of awkward when you've kind of got that upper hand. You're just kind of going off on your co-host. It's
about Iraq.
It's it's a bit much. Now.
Okay. Fine.
So, that's his apology there. Sam always takes everything Jamie says in the most uncharitable way possible. Something he does far more to people on the left. That, and he also straight up cuts her off and talks over her constantly. Maybe if he would ever let her get more than a 3-second soundbite in, she can explain her point more. Damn, Sam, I think your blow up on Jamie was very unwarranted. I know that you extensively covered Iraq at a shameful time in our country, but she attempted to make clear multiple times that her point was not what you assumed was.
Maybe, I was just wondering, maybe I'm missing things. That maybe in some way it is it's, that trans folk.
It's definitely odd, to say the least.
Wow. I am overwhelmed to be here. This is quite an unexpected turn in my life. To be on a panel here with Pragna and Joanna and Sophie and in front of all of you. I didn't plan this. I'm not an academic feminist. I'm not a professional feminist. I'm not a radical feminist. I'm not a socialist feminist. I am a feminist, and I'm an ordinary woman who knows what a woman is and who refused to shut up about it. And as just about everyone, it seems, now knows, I lost my job because of this. I did not bully anyone, and I did not harass anyone. I just wanted to talk about the difference between the idea of gender identity and the reality of sex, and about what the push to conflate the two of them would mean for women's rights. I wanted to talk about that and write about it and tweet about it. and I lost my job. I worked at a think tank on international public policy, and I want to read out the values of the think tank where I worked, the Centre for Global Development. We are willing to challenge powerful institutions and the status quo to promote better evidence-based practice. We are committed to transparency, diversity, and professional and personal integrity. We value mutual respect, a collegial workplace, and a healthy sense of humour. Those are my values, and I stand by them, and I really love that job. It took me a year of reading to build up the courage to tweet about the topic, a year of following and listening to women who've spoken up before me, many of whom are here in this room, a year of reading Mumsnet threads and Twitter discussions and official documents which just did not make sense and did not give me any confidence that the people who were supposed to be the grown-ups were taking this seriously and had thought this through. So after a year of reading and educating myself, I decided to tweet about it. And it wasn't so much that I built up the courage, but the balance between fear and caution on one side and rage on the other just tipped to the point where I couldn't not speak about it. So during the run-up to the end of the consultation on the Gender Recognition Act, I began to tweet about the issue. And a couple of months after I'd started, I got an email from HR, which said, "The Centre for Global Development does not require staff or affiliated experts to vet their public views and social media usage with the organisation. However, do ask that these debates be free of exclusionary statements. There were several tweets you posted that are therefore problematic. For instance, you stated that a man's internal feeling that he is a woman has no basis in material reality. A lot of people would find that offensive and exclusionary. Definitions are exclusionary. I didn't think that sounded too bad, though. I understood the organisation's values, and I thought we would sort of be able to talk about it. They asked me to put a disclaimer on my Twitter bio to say that all tweets and views are my own, so I did that. But over the next few months, first a full-time job offer, then the offer to remain as a visiting fellow, and finally the offer to stay on as a consultant were all gradually withdrawn from me. At one point in the process, I had a meeting with one of the senior managers who gave me the friendly advice that it is career limiting to talk about this topic in public. And she asked me if this was really the hill that I wanted to die on. It turned out it was. So here I am. After I lost my job, I tweeted about that, and the feminist lawyers arrived. Feminist lawyers, hands up, feminist lawyers. There's a few of them. And we went to the Employment Tribunal with a case of belief discrimination and indirect sex discrimination. It was just the preliminary hearing, the question of whether this belief is protected. Because in the UK, under the Equality Act 2010, religious and philosophical beliefs are protected against discrimination. We have a fundamental right to freedom of belief and freedom of speech. And that right's not worth much if you can lose your job for exercising it. The kinds of things that have qualified as philosophical beliefs under the Equality Act include Scottish nationalism, veganism and belief in spiritualism. And this does not mean that people have to agree with each other's beliefs. It does not mean they have to pretend to believe them. It does not mean they even have to say that they respect them. It just means that at work, or as providers of services, you must not treat people detrimentally because they hold a particular belief or do not hold a particular belief. So these were the beliefs that I took to the tribunal to be tested to see whether they were protected under the Equality Act. There are 4. Number 1, sex is a material reality which should not be confused with gender or gender identity. Number 2, being female or male is an immutable biological fact, not a feeling or an identity. Number 3, sex matters. And number 4, in particular, it is important to be able to talk about sex in order to take action against the discrimination, violence, and oppression that still affect women and girls because they were born female. And number 4 relates directly to the demands that the women's liberation movement set out in the 1970s, for things like equal pay, contraception and abortion, childcare, an end to male violence against women, an end to discrimination against lesbians. All of these things relate to the way that society treats the people with the kinds of bodies that can ovulate, gestate, and lactate, and the way it treats the people with the kinds of bodies that can impregnate. And to talk about these things, it is really helpful to have words. And our mother's generation, my mother's generation, found the words to talk about this, to talk about the unfairness between the way that men and women are treated in society. But our daughters are being told that it is unkind and exclusionary to even state the material reality that women are female, that being a woman is not a feeling, that being a woman is not a costume, and that being a woman is not something you can identify out of or identify into. We are being denied the language to talk about the condition of being female, and that means we are being denied the language to talk about women's rights. So, the judge, James Taylor, said that my belief that sex is immutable is absolutist and not worthy of respect in a democratic society. So that means I should have no protection against discrimination for expressing this belief in any circumstance. And this is a belief that was totally ordinary 50 years ago. It was not even a question when the Women's Lib conference was going on. It was a belief that was totally ordinary 5 years ago. And it is a belief that is totally ordinary today. The vast majority of people believe and understand this if they are willing to be truthful. Because it's a belief that is known as stating the bleeding obvious. Humans can't change sex. And that belief is not incompatible with treating people with respect, including men and women who don't conform to gender norms in their appearance, or who undergo body modifications, or who want to express themselves through gender identity. I do not believe that everyone has an innate gender identity, But we can treat other people with consideration and without discrimination, without being compelled to pretend that we share their beliefs. So 2 weeks ago, we filed notice of appeal to the Employment Tribunal. There are lots of legal points in the appeal, but fundamentally it is about whether it is acceptable to talk about women's rights, including the right to privacy and dignity, and including the right to freedom of association in single-sex spaces. And using ordinary language that everyone can understand. So this is what the judge said. He said, "It is quite possible to accept that trans women are women, but still argue that there are certain circumstances in which it would be justified to exclude certain trans women from spaces that are generally only open to women assigned female at birth because of trauma suffered by users of the space who have been subject to sexual assault." I say it is unfair, inhumane, and unworkable to require us to negotiate our rights using this tortured language. To be forced to talk about women assigned male at birth and women assigned female at birth when what we mean is males and females. And it is unfair, inhumane, unworkable, and misogyny writ large to only offer women privacy and consent over who gets to see and touch their bodies if they disclose that they have already been subject to sexual assault. Why can we not use ordinary language and trust what we see? Why can we not be allowed to ask a service provider if a changing room or a hospital ward is women only and expect a straight answer? Why can't men who want to use women's single-sex spaces or compete in women's sports to validate their gender identity accept that that is just not appropriate? I've stood up to this because I can. My children are not tiny. I have an education. I'm articulate. I'm not easily cowed. I have a family that is standing behind me. Most of my friends are standing with me, and many new ones. I seem to have the right mix of anger and politeness, optimism, perseverance, and sheer bloody-mindedness to take this forward. I have a brilliant legal team. I have the support of the 3,000 odd people who supported the crowdfunder. I've got Mumsnet. Where's Mumsnet? Where's Mumsnet? Put your hands up. I've got a local group which started off with 4 people in the pub and is now about 40. Hearts Women. If you haven't got a local group, find one or start one. It's brilliant. I have the support of J.K. Rowling. I went to Scotland last week. I learnt to say her name correctly. I have the support of the 200,000 people who liked her tweet, or more. I say or more because Twitter keeps disappearing the likes, so who knows how many millions really liked that tweet, I'm going to say. But I also stood up because I can, because others can't. If I can't talk about sex in ordinary language, then what about children in school, people with learning difficulties, women in prison, women in refuges, women who speak English as a second language, elderly women in hospital? We all need words. I will stand beside Labour women, Conservative women, Liberal Democrats, Greens, SNP, and the women who find themselves politically homeless. Democrats and Republicans, men of all political stripes, transsexuals who do not demand that we deny reality. People who are motivated by religion and people who have no religion, because a free society depends on protecting the beliefs we do not share and debating ideas openly. And one reason why it's become so hard and so dangerous to state the bleeding obvious is that organisations and people with influence, like my employer,
I'm not going to hear this fucking bullshit anymore.
Have rolled over and abandoned their values of evidence, open debate, and integrity.
We're talking about Iraq.
When faced with offence-taking, they've retreated into silence and mind-numbing, simplistic slogans. So I'm thinking about who is not here. Amnesty International, the Forstater Society, the Equality and Human Rights Commission, Liberty, the trade unions, professional associations, much of the media, and so-called thought leaders and many politicians, and even Starbucks, which came out in support of paediatric transitioning yesterday. There are too many to count, and my disappointment with them is bottomless. They could have made the space for evidence-based public debate, but they didn't. Perhaps like many of us, they initially mistook this for a sideshow, a toxic internet debate, a conservative right-wing movement on the wrong side of history.
Reeks of what I heard 10 to 15 years ago of gay people are looking for special rights.
Perhaps they weren't paying attention.
I just happened to see the clip this morning, and so it obviously resonated with me because I knew that we were having Chase on this afternoon.
Perhaps they were scared and they wanted a quiet life. Perhaps they failed to notice the bullying and abuse because it happens to women.
And they, generally speaking, have an incredibly dismissive tone and just reaction and cadence anytime Jamie's saying literally anything.
I think by now they should have noticed.
Maybe I'm missing things.
And they should have noticed that this is about the basic ability to speak the truth and to do your job. It is about the integrity of organisations. Because if you can make people lie about something, you can make them lie about anything.
It's insane, and it is like the thing where if you accept that trans women are women, you can't make any of the arguments that we make, and that's why they push that so hard,
No one believes it. Even if there's people sitting here watching it that say, I believe trans women are women, you don't. You don't.
Yeah.
No one believes it, right? But for me, I think it's actually the act of defeat. So at the point that you repeat something that you know not to be true, you are then susceptible to just keep repeating things that follow on from the other thing that are not true, that follow on from the other thing. And where does that actually lead?
Yeah, the thing about the deception, that's so interesting, because it's like, it's almost like the emperor's new clothes. And then the second you say like, yeah, I like them, you're screwed. Like, you're in it now. You have to keep praising them, essentially.
You're dying. Your light is growing faint. And if it goes out, that means you're dead. Your voice is so low, I can scarcely hear what you're saying. You think that you could get well again if children believed in fairies. Do you believe? Oh, please, please believe. If you believe, wherever you are, clap your hands and she'll hear you. Clap! Clap! Don't let Teak die! Clap!
You're screwed. Like, you're in it now. You have to keep praising them, essentially.
But I've given up wondering where the grown-ups are. We are the grown-ups. And I see so many people here who have stood up in so many different ways that you'll meet all your heroes today. So I think something really important is happening in the UK. We're small enough and organised enough and angry enough to be pushing back on this in a way that women in North America and in other places have not been able to do effectively yet. And there are really positive signs of change. It is hugely significant that we are here being hosted today at UCL and being welcomed. And not just tolerated. Thank you. And the information about the venue was published weeks ago, not hours ago. This is new. This year, Women's Place UK held a meeting at Oxford University, and Cambridge RadFems held a meeting at Cambridge University. Mainstream women's organisations like the Women's Resource Centre and the Women's Budget Group are not shying away from this debate, and they're here. And SBS, Filia, and the Centre for Women's Justice. Index on Censorship has stood up for me. And the unexpected level of feedback on the government's consultation, I think, has made them sit up and realise that self-ID is not the simple good thing that they thought it was. We can speak up and we can be heard. And inside every workplace, every school, every college, every university, every political organisation and association, there are women and men trying to find the courage to speak up and a strategy for doing it without losing their job. There is safety in numbers, and they can't fire us all.
Okay. You know, I mean, fine.
So one thing I want to ask you to do today to help to cope with your rage, whether you have spoken up publicly or not, one thing you can do here now before you leave today is this is the consultation of the Scottish Government on self-ID, which is live at the moment. We have enough forms for everyone. They will be in the cafe where the stalls are. The first stall on the right is the Fair Play for Women stall, and we've set up there. Fill in the form, put it in the post box, it will get to Edinburgh. Because what happens in Scotland will affect what happens in the UK. And what happens in the UK will affect the rest of the world. These people, us in this room, standing up for women's rights and democracy, we will make a difference.
We've all been raised on Tumblr to believe that one day we'd all be clownfish and seahorses and penis fencing slugs. But we won't, and we're slowly learning that fact. And we're very, very pissed off. Mouthfeel, yeah. And just to clarify that this isn't coming from a conservative perspective, I totally think that if there was ever a time where Steven Crowder and Sam Seder debated, that Sam Seder would absolutely wipe the floor with Steven Crowder. I thought it was hilarious when Steven Crowder said, do you want to know what my audience would say if they heard the name Sam Seder? They'd say, Sam who?
Ethan, come on, man. Look, the same reason that I haven't ever had a conversation with Sam Seder, there's the same reason that Joe Rogan, Sam Harris, Brett Weinstein, Dave Rubin, Ben Shapiro don't own anything. It's based on a lie. There's no one backing you, Sam. Why do you feel that anyone owes you airtime when you have a 40th of the audience? You've been doing
I don't think anybody owes me airtime. I think that Ethan has just given it to me. I didn't ask him for it. Do you think your audience cares that I only have 1 million subscribers and you have, what, 6 or 7 million subscribers?
My audience would say Sam who?
Like, oh, is your audience a bunch of, like, catty 13-year-old girls? Sam who? Quit trying to make Sam happen. It's not gonna happen. So yes, absolutely. Sam Seder would defeat Steven Crowder undeniably, even, I think, potentially on the issue of gender identity, because Sam Seder's a decent debater and Steven Crowder's pretty shitty. So I think he could definitely win a debate, even where he was in the wrong.
Okay. Fine.
But that's what makes it kind of so boring to me. It's like, yes, it is kind of funny because Steven Crowder, like, didn't target specific college students, but would go to college students to have arguments, which is like, yeah, going to a primary school to pick a fight. Like, oh, I didn't pick a specific, like, primary school kid to bash. I just hung around acting belligerently until I got the opportunity to attack one. And, like, yeah, okay, obviously it's not violence, it's a discussion, etc., etc. But there is something about specifically going to colleges. Like, you're deliberately avoiding a more adult population. So anyway, yeah, that is totally justified, and it's great PR for Sam Seder. But the thing to me is that, I mean, maybe he's correct, maybe he's been unaware of it up until now, but I think he, to some extent, is consciously avoiding difficult discussions around this subject. Maybe not yet, but I think he will be very shortly. And yeah, I think that Cara Dansky, or basically any of the women from Wolf, would easily defeat Sam Seder, because, as we know, Sam Seder's only sort of half paying attention to this discussion anyways.
I just happened to see the clip this morning, and so it obviously resonated with me because I knew that we were having Chase on this afternoon.
He wouldn't know who Maya Forstater was. He would just know, like, whatever Democratic Party or whatever that's funding my little radio show, what we're doing now is the trans shit, and so that's what we're doing.
What's happening? We need to talk about your TPS reports.
And so from the jump, anyone who's been aware and actually paying attention to this debate for, 5-10 years would automatically have a massive advantage. So yeah, Sam, why don't you at Cara Dansky and have her on the Majority Report, and she can explain to you specifically the issues you've been kind of blithely ignoring while you've been much more engaged in this weird little chest bumping competition with Steven Crowder.
Okay. Fine.
So Sam doesn't have cold feet. Sam's got toasty feet.
We're talking about Iraq.
When will Toasty Feet Seder debate Cara Dansky?
Talking about Iraq.
Never, because he's full of shit.
Okay. Fine.
So, well, this is how we gonna do this. Fuck
Sam Seder. Fuck Emma Vigeland. The 5-time award-winning Majority Report.
As a staff, record label, and as a motherfucking crew. And if you want to be down with
Sam Seder,
then fuck you too. All you motherfuckers, fuck you too.
Peter.
All of y'all
richest, creamiest fat in the world. I'm not going to hear this fucking bullshit
Can
anymore.
I finish
I'm
what I was
tired of it.
saying? Jesus, I was agreeing with you.
Every time you do not hold a president, every time you do not hold a president, you know, I mean, fine.
So,
what? What?
Fuck 'em. We bad boy killers.
What? Maybe I'm missing things.